So I'm here to give a little bit of context to the Physio My Way app, a detailed review of each particular function that I required, and the rationale behind why I think it's the direction in which healthcare should be heading. Now, I've hired a guy that's sat behind these curtains here, drawing things up on the screen in a new little bit of technology in relation to what I'm saying. Now, obviously, I'm going to be facing you guys. So if he starts drawing anything that he shouldn't be, which he has done in the past, please do let me know, but he is under oath. So, we're not the best of friends, but let's see how it gets on. Rightio. So, let's kick off. First off, what is physiotherapy? So it's known slightly differently in these parts of the world as a physical therapist, although that does give me flashbacks to the Olivia Newton-John video. I can assure you, we don't turn up for work in the morning wearing neon leg warmers and gathering around for a team stretch. Now, physiotherapists are involved in the maintenance of health and of function. This includes everything from muscle to bones, heart, lungs and brain. Chances are, if there's something wrong with you, you're going to have me knocking at your door. We work as part of a team to deliver rehab interventions with the aim of helping a patient to return to their normal level of function. Now, this can range anywhere from getting elite athletes back onto the playing field ready for that big game at the weekend, and all the way through to helping an elderly patient become a little bit more independent in order to be discharged home from hospital and back into their own environment, and the thousands of patients that come in between them. Now, in an ideal world, we've got a room here full of patients that are compliant with their rehab programs, they follow the correct path, and they're back to normal function as soon as possible. Now, looking around, chances are a few have had a couple of injuries in the past, either old sports injuries, or you may be experiencing what we call wear and tear as all part of old age, as I'm sure baby boomer generation have been told they've got. Now, I'm sure a few of you will be coming to me at the reception later on this evening with your case studies and asking a couple of questions. Now, either way, you've probably been given a set of exercises to help you with your injury, which you're going to tell me that you completed in full every single night before your bath, bed and cup of cocoa. Well, unfortunately, not everyone is like you, I can assure you, especially from my experience. The idea of compliance to any given treatment is one of the main talking points within the National Health Service as we know of it today, and it rarely occurs in isolation. It can be a chain of events, starting with patients failing to complete their exercises and then becoming demotivated because they're not seeing the results on what they're doing. It can result in patients failing to attend appointments. Every year, missed appointments cost the NHS £745 million. So what is the NHS? It's arguably Britain's greatest achievement in modern history. For almost 70 years now, it's managed to maintain a service which is free at the point of delivery and based solely on clinical need and not the ability to pay. And a lot has changed over that time, and the NHS has managed to develop in line with this to ensure that it consistently meets the needs of each individual patient. It's at the forefront of political discussion and under constant scrutiny in terms of service needs, the costs and the priorities. As with any organisation, there are key areas for improvement, and with political change on the horizon, as Don mentioned, there is no greater time to evaluate what is currently being offered. For example, within a musculoskeletal outpatient setting, so we'll go ahead and shorten that to MSK, but that basically stands for any injuries to muscles and bones, as I'm sure you'd expect. This is arguably one of the most overstretched services within the NHS at present. If you're working as a physio in this setting, you can be expected to see up to 16 patients per day, spending no more than 20 minutes with the majority of them as follow-up appointments. Stressful? Yes, but at the end of the day, you're still taking a wage home, so it could be worse. Now, if you're a patient with an issue that you could have had for some time, such as lower back pain or knee pain, and you're looking at an 18-week wait before you even step through the front door of that service. Now, that's over 4 months of missed opportunity to me. Obviously, I am using a worst-case scenario here to exaggerate my point, but the NHS successfully achieves their target of treating 92% of patients within that 18-week bracket. However, in March of this year, our government has relaxed the targets for non-urgent surgeries, meaning potentially longer waiting times. Now, it's unclear at present whether this could be trialled over other parts of the service, but it's all for deliberation. Now, once you reach an appointment with your physiotherapist, you'll be assessed and you'll receive a diagnosis and a treatment depending on how you present during the session. A typical example may be reduced strength in a muscle group, reduced range of movement, all leading to limited function. Now, common practice is to set an individualised exercise programme that the patient can take away. The rationale behind this is you're putting the accountability and the onus on the patient to become responsible for their own recovery. For the most part, we have moved away from the idea of going to the NHS to get that direct treatment, massage, acupuncture, to ensure that the patient doesn't become reliable should the injury happen again. We're thinking long term now. Now that's not to say they're not available, and they very much are in the private sector at some cost. But it's not the chosen direction for the NHS at present. Now, in terms of the exercise programme, best practice you could expect is a printed sheet listing 3 or 4 exercises and detailing the correct number of repetitions and sets you need to complete. For those that haven't heard those terms, a repetition is an exercise from point A through to point B and back again. It's 1 repetition. A set would be 10 repetitions, for example. You could be asked to complete 10 repetitions, 3 sets a day, 30 exercises in total. Now, unfortunately, in many instances, this best practice scenario is not the case. You could be more likely to receive a sheet of generic exercises that could be applied to a range of different injuries, but they're not individualised to you, and they may not be the most effective for your particular injury. You'd get a big cross to the ones that you're not being asked to do, a quick scroll of the number of repetitions and sets, and any adaptations to the exercises because they're not a direct fit to the ones you may have been shown in your session. Now, these exercises themselves, they may have been poorly photocopied from a generic booklet using a printer that predates the moon landing. Now, I'm sure you'd agree that, all things considered, you could probably expect better service from a United Airlines flight. It's banking on that one. From that point onwards, here's where I feel the main issue lies. Now, there's no formal method of monitoring the exercises that a patient completes. All very odd. Now, when your patient arrives at the next session, you reassess them and gather information regarding how they've gotten on since their last appointment. Essentially, you're going to be relying on your patient's account of the exercises that they've completed. Now, if you were to put 2 patients together in a room, and one patient has completed 4 exercises, and one's completed 30, you would have no way of differentiating between the 2. Now, this can bring about a whole host of difficulties in its own. Now, I won't bore you with the underpinning details of the theories and the research jargon, but I can break it down to these few points. Firstly, you're relying on the patient's recollection. Now, you could potentially be talking 3 weeks between appointments, leaving a good amount of room for error, even though best of our memories are not great at the best of times. So secondly, the patient could claim to have completed all of the exercises because that's what they think the physio wants to hear. And we're all guilty of this from time to time. Whether your boss comes up to you and asks you if you're on course for the upcoming deadline, or your doctor asking you how many units of alcohol you drink per week. We're all guilty of the occasional white lie. Now, thirdly, physiotherapy is routinely offered after road traffic and workplace accidents, which could potentially have insurance companies involved. Now, it's not my place to question the patient's motive by any means, and they wouldn't be discriminated with the NHS. But all I'm saying is if the patient is really injured, then they should have no issue proving that they're completing their exercise programme to return to the normal level of function. So on the back of the information provided, the physio is expected to progress or regress the exercise programme to ensure that it remains appropriate for them at that stage of the patient's rehab. The physio is starting from a disadvantaged position if they're not given the correct information at that time, from which to base their clinical judgment. At worst, it could negatively impact the patient's rehab and make getting back to normal function a much longer and larger task, resulting in that. So, what is Physio My Way? It's an app that has been designed to remotely monitor upper limb range of movement exercises. As it says on the tin, as I said earlier, these are exercises that take a movement from point A through to point B and back. The very basic introductory exercises which are routinely given as part of an initial rehab programme for maintaining the function that they've got before looking to build the strength back up. Now, these exercises were chosen for a number of reasons. In terms of gaining ethical approval for the study, range of movement exercises pose the least amount of risk to the patient when you compare them to alternatives like bodyweight exercises. They involve minimal exertion. When you compare them to lower limb exercises, where you're sitting now, I could ask you to raise your hand and do one of those exercises with little issue. When I ask you to flex your hip joint, bring your knee towards your chest, chances are you'd be impeded by something before getting to the end of your movement. clothing, for example. So in order to get a true representation of the movement at the hip joint, you're going to be looking at doing it in standing instead. Now, at which point, you start bringing other variables in, like the patient's balance. Not only that, but you're opening yourself up to differences in posture, technique, and the level of support, whether the patient needs to hold on at any point. Now, with the upper limb exercises, you're allowing the participant to maintain a stable base of support throughout the exercises and eliminating these variables. As well as this, you're incorporating movements at two joints, the shoulder and the elbow, and the exercises also account for the three planes of movement. So these are sagittal, so any movements occurring going forward, frontal, so any movements occurring to the side, and transverse, so rotational movements. And it was really key to get these as part of the exercise study, because each exercise can give a true representation of the movements produced, and they challenge the monitoring capabilities of the app. We're not going to let it have an easy task. Okay, so now as with everything, the app itself is going to have strengths and weaknesses in terms of the different areas it can be applied to and the different patients that use it. Speaking from experience, I can tell you that working in accident and emergency late at night with drunk patients, anything can be used as a weapon. So more of a proceed with caution approach in this setting. The main opportunities at this stage are those where range of movement exercises are commonplace. So we have, of course, the MSK outpatient setting I discussed earlier, but as well as this, we've got orthopedics. So the orthopedic setting is an umbrella term which covers surgeries for fractures and joint replacements in the main. Within this setting, you have two main types of patient. You have elective patients and you have trauma patients. Now, as the name suggests, elective patients are those who have chosen to undergo surgery in order to improve their quality of life under the guidance of their orthopedic consultant. An example would be patients with arthritic changes in weight-bearing joints such as the hips and the knees, to the point where the quality of life is far reduced. This can be through limited range of movement, chronic pain, or structural changes, which can lead to a different walking pattern. Now, a change in walking pattern can lead to secondary issues caused through compensatory movements with other groups or joints being involved. Elective patients have time to prepare for their surgery in terms of a structured pre-surgery rehabilitation programme. Now, whilst this is currently being offered within the NHS, and to very good effect in some cases, we still have the absence of the formal monitoring system. The second type are trauma patients. So these are involved in the road traffic accidents. When compared to an elective patient, they can be of a younger demographic. Now, this leaves greater scope for improvement as the level of function they're expecting to get back to is much higher than that of an elderly elective patient. It's not always the case. There's a high representation from the elderly population due to falls-related injuries. But the key factor here would be utilising the app with the correct type of patient based on their character. So in a basic sense, you're considering any candidate who is able to navigate the app and cognitively engage with what you're asking them to do. Past that, your ideal candidate would also be motivated to complete the exercise programme and competitive in nature. Always helps. So, as with anything, the app carries limitations. But the importance lies within highlighting these and understanding how to minimise their influence. The three key ones I'll be talking about today are the professional involved, so the physiotherapist, the patient, and the technology. Now, being able to tick that little box as I'm walking through the airport that says 18 to 25 years old, on the phone it says, it carries with it certain stereotypes. Not all of them are positive. Binge drinking on a school night, for example. It's all part of being a millennial. But one of the positives is that we've been raised on this type of technology. So smartphones, GPS, and touchscreens. We've never known anything else. We've had email addresses before we had home addresses, and we've had Facebook accounts before we had bank accounts. In terms of following the world into this paperless state everyone speaks of, I don't think that we're the ones that necessarily need to be worried. And I'll give you an example why. So in my last clinical placement, I worked in a team of 9 people, all from different healthcare derivatives, delivering physiotherapy to patients in the community. Now, I walked in the office one morning, saw 4 people huddled around one computer. Now, we're talking about 10 past 8 in the morning now, not overly switched on, so make my way to the kettle. Okay, get myself ready for the day. The closer I got to the computer, I started to realise that each of the professionals had their head tilted to one side, quite considerably. It's all very odd. But if I can help it, there's only one 8 a.m. in my day, so I carry on with my day, think nothing more of it. 5 minutes later, they're still at it, getting a little bit more tilted, and they've gone the other way this time. So I had to walk over, ask what was going on. One of them says, none of us know how to rotate a PDF, so we've got to work together to try and read what it says when it comes through. 4 years this team's been going, and none of them's put up the training in place to be able to do it. And then she says to me, this is nothing, you should see when it comes through upside down. I didn't ask. But obviously with the right training in place, you'd hope that we would be able to minimise any issues with regards to the physiotherapists that are using the app. With the patients, there's been a huge drive of technology in recent years, as I'm sure you're aware. Over 80% of adults in the UK now own and use a smartphone. And you can't be without them either. 70% of us in the UK check our iPhones within the first 30 minutes of waking up. And you know what they say, you can never be more than 5 feet from someone who's wearing a Fitbit. Quick show of wrists? Alrighty. So whether it's how many calories they've had today, how many steps you've taken, or how many hours since your last toilet break, it's going to monitor it all for you. And if you're one of the very few that hasn't subscribed to Apple Watches or Fitbits, how do we know all this is going on? That's right, you've got to read about it every 5 minutes on your Facebook newsfeed. So regardless of how interested you are in Dave's new 5-kilometre personal best time down the strip, or Sharon's choice of lunchtime snack after walking an admirable 2,000 steps this morning, sharing progress is a huge motivating factor, and there's really no escaping it. Not only that, but don't be fooled by age either. Over in the UK, the largest growth of smartphone usage since 2014 isn't among the 18 to 25-year-olds, but in fact, the over 55s. Now, if you require a physio at a younger age, possibilities suggest that it's due to a sports injury or fracture, some sort of traumatic event. As the patient ages, the outlook changes from the treatment of acute injuries more towards long-term promotion of health and maintenance of chronic issues such as arthritis, lower back injuries, joints awaiting replacements. When setting your rehab goals with an older patient, the discussions also change from getting back to sport and getting back to that higher level of function to gauging a new level of independence or seeing how much assistance they might need around the home. And it's all about slowing down the decline of function. It all ties in with this use it or lose it adage that I'm sure you will have heard before. Now, this gives an opportunity for the more motivated and compliant patient with the right guidance to be able to use the app to good effect. Now, the third limitation I mentioned earlier was technology. Now, obviously, all of the other guys that are presenting this week, they're going to tell you that Synergex products work 100% of the time, every single time. Now, I'm here to tell you that they're lying. I'm not. Obviously, I'm kidding. I've got research this year that supports their claim. Now, time for a very quick disclaimer. The research undertaken into this project is yet to be validated and published. This will come over the next 6 weeks to 2 months. And whilst I can stand here and assure you that the data that we've gathered and collated is accurate and valid and reliable, it's your decision as a purely objective audience to accept what I'm saying or completely disregard it. I'd like to hope that you opt for the first option, but that is your choice in this world of democracy. Now, for this next section, I'd like to invite Richard up as my developer and assistant, because we thought it would be much more beneficial to show the next session as a joint entity. Now I'm going to leave the tech side to him. The process started around August last year and has developed into what we can show you today. Now, I thought it'd make much more sense for Richard as the developer to come up at this point and discuss the input that he had at each point with each request, however demanding they were. Now, when you're thinking about a project that has a deadline 9 months away, and you know that it has to keep you interested long enough to conduct an entire study and write a 10,000-word dissertation on it, how do you start? In the most British way possible, of course, shacked up in a coffee shop with a pot of Earl Grey and a full English breakfast. So I'm sat in this coffee shop, sat next to two of the biggest, roughest builders that you've ever seen, scribbling down notes on social cognitive theories, social desirability, recall bias, all that research jargon. And I think to myself, right, let's strip it right back to basics. What's going to get these two fellas moving their arm for a week or so just because I've asked them to? So, first point of call, I looked into what was available already on the app stores. Not just within the health and exercise and lifestyle sections, but throughout the app store in its entirety to get a general overview of how the apps functioned, what the desired features were, what the prevailing trends were, particularly among those top ranking apps. From this point, I managed to pinpoint the key features that would ensure that Physio My Way was fit for purpose, concise and efficient. So whatever I'm looking to achieve when I'm using an app, I want to be there as soon as possible and with as little effort as possible. And I'm sure that's the same for any one of you. So take Amazon, for example, with one-click purchasing. For the most part, it's fantastic in terms of efficiency and time. Not so much when you sat up late at night after a couple of Jack Daniels. It doesn't give you a lot of time in deliberating whether you really need that to scale model of the DeLorean. You know, the one with the light up flux capacitor, flames coming out the back. Okay, wife's not a massive fan, but as far as I'm concerned, it fits nicely right up on the fireplace, no problems. Okay, so moving on, Spotify. One click, and I'm listening to any song from my music library, whatever that may be. Even Pokemon Go. Yes, those of us that still play it, skulking around the malls and the car parks. One click and I'm all set to try and catch a Pikachu. So that was my first request to the developer. One click launch, please.
And this is where I go back to PowerPoint, I think. Okay, so as requested by the customer, the Physio My Way app was designed to have as few clicks as possible. From starting the app and the device. The app requires the user to be authenticated, which we'll discuss later on in the presentation. Except during the first time of authentication, when the app is run, the user is taken immediately to their home screen. The home screen is their list of prescribed exercises. Each item contains an image of the exercise. Touching the image takes the user to the exercise page, where there's a 3-second countdown before the exercise starts automatically. So from running the app to doing their first exercise is a single touch. So I think we achieved what was asked for. Once the required exercise repetitions have been completed, they can touch the I'm done touch point, and again, a single touch, and that information is sent back to a central cloud server and all recorded against that patient. One touch on the next exercise in the list, and they're already exercising again. Each item in the list provides a single touch point to enable them to drill down to more information in the list. The exercise information form contains images and descriptions, which we'll look about later. Each of these pages, the user can swipe back, or they can hit the back button. Again, one touch or one swipe, and they're back where they want to be.
Okay, so the second feature that came from the search was the burger menu. Now at the start of this, I won't lie, there was only one burger menu in my world, and it wasn't this one. But I soon came to realise that having it meant that there were fewer movements between the screens, and it was much easier to manoeuvre in all. When we're considering ways to minimise the user error, having fewer screens and a central point to reach them from is an obvious benefit.
The app has a very simple burger menu that allows selections of various different options. As the app is currently designed, there are only a few options available. More will be added in the future. One of the options that's available is new emails. Authentication into the app is via an email address and a password. You can request a new password from the options menu through the burger menu. The reason for this, although it sounds very strange to have this sort of capability because you're already logged into the app and running it, it is there, and to be honest, it most definitely helped when I was going through the login and license Synergy device allocation sequence testing. Another option on there, when the app first runs, it will allocate a Synergy device license, and I'll talk and discuss more about that shortly. Once a license has been allocated to a device, it is linked to that device. The only real way to ensure that you delink a license from a device is to deallocate the license on that device. There's a big disclaimer on the options menu that says only do this when you're told to by your physiotherapist under the pain of death. But other than that, you can click it as and when. There are other options from the options screen that takes you from the burger menu, and as I say, I'll talk about those later.
So the participants that I recruited for the study were going to need to know exactly what they were being asked to do. In terms of the study, I took care of the information handouts, which detailed what the study entailed, what they were being asked to do, and what incentives would be offered. None. But, and what it could mean in the future for both them and for healthcare in general. Given that I recruited a healthy and uninjured population, I forwent the assessment and diagnosis sections of the physio, and I was planning on replacing the face-to-face contact with detailed descriptions and videos. Now, the reasons that I'm featured in the videos and images, it's not down to my narcissism, contrary to what you may believe, although it is quite nice being App Store famous. However strange it may be. Now, unfortunately, there wasn't the budget available, so I'm told, for a beautiful model, no matter how much I persisted. Not only that, but it also gave me the chance, when doing the PEGI requirements, to state that the videos included sexual content. Now, he's going to kill me for that joke, because I know he was banking on using it later on. But if he does use it, please just promise me you'll laugh, because it's one of his only ones. So, in short, I needed the participants to have access to descriptions, images, and videos at any time, and with any amount of signal.
From the patient's homepage that lists their exercises, which we saw a minute ago, there's a single touch point to enable the user to drill down into the information, more detailed information about the exercises. The expanded exercise form displays various static images. There's a single touch point on that form that then takes us into the information, and you can then go to the videos from here. At this point you'll see the client in his videos. Now this video plugin is from the Xamarin Component Store. If your application is going to implement stuff like this, you will need to configure permissions in your manifest that will allow internet access. You think your phone is allowed complete internet access, but it's not. You have to actually request it in your app. Many of the components like this, which you require a license, will ask for information that uniquely identifies your app in the various stores. On Android, this is usually the package name. For the Physio My Way app, we named this com.synergex.physiomyway app. The structure of the package name is defined by Google, and if you want to publish on the Google App Play Store, you will have to honour their format. Use your own names, but they have a format. Once you have defined this package name, it's registered with Google and you can't change it very easily. If you do, you tend to have to repurchase your licensed components and obviously incur more cost. On iOS, you define the package identifier, which is slightly different. For Physio My Way, we use the same com.synergex.physiomyway app. The process to release your app on the Apple App Store is a long and complicated, stress-induced, non-trivial process that I will talk about later.
So granted, this next feature didn't really come directly from the search, but it was pretty obvious, the monitoring system. Now I needed a way of accurately measuring the amount of time that a user spent on each exercise screen within the app. The upper limb exercises that were chosen were derived from evidence, meaning that I could instruct each participant in exactly how long it should take them to complete each repetition based on the current research, and how many repetitions they should complete of each exercise. Past that, basic maths would dictate that 10 lots of 10 seconds. So the next feature was a way of monitoring the screen activity within predefined parameters.
The client required that the device would actually be able to monitor activity as exercise were being completed. This monitoring will be based on the expected time or duration of each exercise. Once an exercise was selected, the exercise screen gave them a 3-second countdown and then automatically started exercising. The exercise screen here shows the elapsed time and the number of repetitions thus far completed. These values, when the user touches the I'm done touch point, are sent to the central server and recorded within the database. The elapsed time and number of repetitions are simple text fields that we data bind to. More on that later. Around the repetitions value, we've implemented what we call a shape view from Xamarin Forms. The shape view provided us the ability to put a coloured circle around the elapsed time and repetition count values on the screen. Ooh, I hear you say. This not only allowed us to make the values stand out a little, but also offered us the ability to provide an indication, as you can see on the repetitions, of the progress of those repetitions, or the repetitions completed. The circle around the repetitions value would colour differently as the percentage of repetitions completed. The shape view from Xamarin Forms is documented to be supported on both Android and iOS platforms. However, on the iOS platform, which you're seeing there, we noticed it didn't actually display the progress circle.
So, to quote Bill Gates, choose a lazy person to do a hard job because a lazy person will always find an easy way to do it. So that's exactly what we did. Now, probably the easiest job amongst this entire study was finding a lazy person in a university. And we didn't get past the first person before creating a lot more work. Now, I talked through the plan for the study with our willing guinea pig, to which he replied, okay, 10 exercises, 10 repetitions, 4 exercises. Yeah, I get it, not a problem. Start. Eight, 9, 10. Okay, all done. Okay, we had to dig a little bit deeper than screen activity. So the next step, how could we tell if the participant was actually completing their exercise or not?
The client required that the device would be able to monitor activity as exercises were being completed. This ensures that time as well as actual repetitions could be recorded. The exercise screen, once the 3-second countdown completes, shows elapsed time and, as we said, number of repetitions completed. To be able to monitor movement of the device means we have to plug into the accelerometers built into the device. No mean feat, I hear you say. As we'll see later, the Physio My Way app is built in synergy from the ground up and fully utilises the Xamarin Forms technology. The app comprises of a number of libraries that layer technologies and reduce the amount of device-specific coding required. Depending on the type of component or plugin being used, determines where you place it in the logical application stack. Some components, like the shape view I showed a minute ago, fit nicely into the Common Forms library. Common because all the forms are coded that work on all devices. Code once, deploy many. The accelerometer plugin used, called cross-device motion, needs to be coded on each target device because you're plugging into that device's accelerometer. This does not mean you write lots of code for each device. You simply call the required start and stop methods on the cross-device motion class and register event handlers, which will be called when the device moves. And trust me, the device will move a lot. When the device sensor values change, the event handlers simply pipe your sensor values into your common code. The common code can then handle and record those movements and whether it was a repetition. For Physio My Way, recorded movements at specific times. Basically when the patient was doing the out movement and the in movement. Each exercise, as the client showed, has a set pattern. The exercise has a start point, a duration to an end point, or a hold point, and then a duration back to the start point. The out one we call the out movement, and the one back in we call the in movement. The app only recorded movement during those times. So if there was any movement during the hold, we didn't record it. If there was any movement here, we didn't record it. So we had to code also into the application for different devices, different motion values, because an Android would say you've moved 10 units, and an iOS would say you've moved 50 units. Okay? So we needed to know the device in the common code, and we needed to code it accordingly. Now, one note here, this type of development can only be tested on a physical device. It's not possible to test this with an emulator. With Android it's dead easy, because you can build and deploy directly onto your Android device from Visual Studio running on your PC once your Android device is running debug mode. iOS or iPhone is different. You have to build that on a remote or on a Mac device, and my build Mac machine, I live in England, was sat in Sacramento, and they wouldn't fly me across every week to plug my phone in and do some testing. So it meant for interesting times.
Okay, so next we had to think logistically about how the exercises were going to be completed long term. For the purpose of this study, we were using purely upper limb exercises. We could have saved ourselves a little bit of time and effort and asked each participant to simply hold their phone in their hand whilst they completed the exercises. But we weren't looking for an app that could satisfy the needs of the study. We were looking for one that could be utilised in mainstream healthcare. When you consider future developments of the app, we're going to be looking at expanding the exercise library to include lower limb range of movement exercises. Now, if you've got a patient from Chernobyl way with 6 fingers and webbing between each one, then they might not have a problem keeping hold of their phone throughout the lower limb exercises. For the rest of us, however, we knew that we would need to have the phone strapped to the wrist or the ankle throughout, giving limited visibility to the phone screen and the instructions that it displayed. So at this point, we needed to consider audio prompting.
The client soon realised that strapping the device to your wrist or even just holding it in your hand while performing the exercises would not give the user any practical indication of how the exercise was progressing. Remember, our motion detection would only check if the device moved during a certain time, okay? Because we knew the times and the types of movement. Unless the patient performed the movements at the right time, as I say, the times were defined by the exercise, then would we accurately record movement or the motion? So the app needed a way to ensure that the patient was guided through the complete exercise process and for each repetition. The app was given a voice. In place of just using sounds or beeps, we implemented a text-to-speech solution. When the patient was required to start the out movement, the device would speak and say, "Start exercise." Once the duration of the out movement was completed, the device would say, "Hold." After the required hold duration, again, the device would speak, "Start return," and you'd do the return. Hold, or halt, would then be spoken when the movement was completed. This was repeated for each repetition and guided the patient to a successful completion of the required number of repetitions of the required exercise. Once the number of repetitions had been completed, the device would speak "exercise complete," and thus provide an indication to the patient that they'd completed all the required repetitions. Well done. The default for the app when first installed is to enable spoken instructions, as you would expect. This can be configured on the options screen, which was available from our little burger menu. Getting the phone talking was a rather exciting moment, and we had to find other ways to use it. So when you first start the app, it greets you with, and it'll take a minute I'm sure, the "Welcome to Physio My Way." The API used to provide the text-to-speech is called cross-text-to-speech. In a similar way that we implemented the cross-device motion API, the code to perform the text-to-speech needs to be coded in the device. We simply raise an event, however, from our common code that says, here's the text-to-speak, and the device actually does it. One caveat is that the API did not provide the ability to force the volume of the device or even to set the sound on. So this means even if you have speech configured in the application, you would not hear anything if the device was put into silent mode. To counter this situation, we also enabled vibrate on start, which offered the same indications as when the device spoke, but made the device vibrate instead. While you're holding the device, even with it in silent mode, it will vibrate to indicate start an exercise, continue, hold, etc. This provided the patient with a couple of different ways to ensure they completed the exercise repetitions at the right time, at the right speed, and we could monitor and get the right results. Again, on the options menu, the user had the ability to configure what they wanted, device vibration or not.
It's a standardised process to go through at university for gaining ethical approval for a research project. Very much a tick box exercise, saying that you won't intentionally bring harm to patients, you won't be looking to offer incentives like money or chocolate, and that all the data will remain confidential. As I'm sure you can imagine, quite a lengthy process. I was the last man standing in the library on more than one occasion. But it also involves a meeting with your study supervisor to discuss through your idea logistically. Now, when I took my idea over to my supervisor, aside from the general guidance that I received, she asked for Synergex business cards and told me how an app like Physio My Way would be very beneficial in her clinical setting. Now, she's one of the leading researchers in dyspraxia in children. It's a condition affecting limb control and coordination. Now, clearly, there is a need for this app. But back to the ethical approval. Part of the confidentiality aspect meant that each participant needed their own unique private login that I would be able to gain access to as their physiotherapist. Remote monitoring systems meant that I have the ability to intervene at any point in a patient's rehab journey, positively or negatively. Now, this could be a little bit of encouragement, or if the patient's getting on better than expected, I can look to progress them a little area than I would normally have been able to in their next appointment. Now, I personally thought that this would spark a little bit of creative flair from Mr. Developer, but what does he come back with? The ever imaginative new password. Got the job done, didn't it?
The Physio My Way app has to be able to identify, you didn't tell me it was me, the individual user. We need to be able to track and record exercises for a particular patient. At the same time, the data has to be stored on a central server that a device could be basically anywhere in the world. The solution chosen was to host the data in a Synergy DBMS files and on a Windows Microsoft Azure server in the cloud. The Azure platform gave us a cloud-based solution, and using SDBMS was obvious, fast and reliable, as we all know. In addition to knowing the individual user, by having a device application written entirely in Synergy, we also had to be able to license it using Synergy device licensing. The general approach to Synergy device licensing requires a two-step process. The first step is to register the application within your application list. This will generate a public key and an app GUID. These two values will be emailed to you and must be added into your application code. For access to the device licensing portal, you'll need to be signed up for the Resource Centre, the new Resource Centre. See your account manager if you don't currently have a login. Everybody here should have a login. If you don't have these two pieces of information, the code in your app will not run. And in fact, it might not even build, and the chances are it won't build. The second step, once you've configured that, requires that each device activates their own unique license when the app is installed and first run. this will allocate a license from your application license block on the portal. One note here, as I said earlier, it is useful to provide the ability within your app to deallocate a device license, so you can deallocate it on the app, otherwise it will be orphaned. If the user is going to decommission a device or not use the app anymore, it is ideal to have them deallocate it, as I said. Uninstalling the app does not remove the license from the device license portal. So the unique license to that device will be orphaned. It will still be allocated within your license block. There's stuff you can do, but it will be there. From a new unique ID aspect, the Physio My Way does not use any user details. We didn't feel it appropriate to record user details on the license portal. When the Synergy device license code runs in your app, for example when the app is first run after being installed, the device license API requires 3 pieces of information. You need a token and a password. These 2 pieces of information you configure through the device license portal and the resource center at www.synergyde.com. The third is the unique reference that will identify the device, and it has to be unique. At that point, you can run Synergy code. You're in the license activation callback method or activation dialog callback method. Don't let the method name fool you. It does not have to be a dialog on the device. In the Physio My Way app, the code does not ask the user for any information, but calls a remote method on the cloud server to retrieve a unique GUID. This GUID is then used to register the license on that device. The app then continues to ask, if it's the first time, for the email address and password, which was set up and configured by your physiotherapist. The email address and password is then validated, again with a call to the remote Azure server. Once validated, the app continues to the patient's home screen. In the background, at this point, the app again communicates to the remote server and sends the GUID that it's been allocated along with the username and password, or the username, to link the user to that device GUID. From this point on, the device will not ask for the user details again. Instead, a second login GUID is stored on the device. When the app is run for a second or subsequent time, this login GUID is used to then access the remote server to say, am I a valid user? This authenticates the GUID and locates the associated patient details. A brand new login GUID is then sent back to the device, and that happens every single time you run the device. The system is configured like that for security. This is a slightly different model to many apps, where you would subscribe to an app and be able to run it on several different devices, such as both a work and personal mobile, a tablet and a desktop PC. The nature of the Physio My Way app would mean that you generally only run it on your personal phone, and strapping a tablet or even a desktop PC to your wrist to perform an exercise is really not practical and should be actively discouraged.
So the final step in the process was deciding where to place the app. Recruitment of participants sort of dictated this really, in that we only really needed to consider Apple and Android. The same can be said with the rest of the UK population, where only 1% are said to own and use a Windows phone. Now, I believe the developer is going to take over at this point to discuss the technology stack that makes up Physio My Way. I'm reliably informed that it's written in something called Synergy, although your guess is as good as mine, because I just moved my arm.
So how does the technology used for Physio My Way stack up? Firstly, as you would expect, it's all Synergy from the ground up. Synergy.net today provides us the ability to write both the server code and the client library code that are portable and can run on target platforms, namely Android and iOS. It would, if needed, work on the Windows mobile, but no one in the target audience for Physio My Way had a Windows phone. One day, I'll add the Windows Phone project to the solution and see how it goes. At the core of this app is the Symfony framework. It all starts with Symfony data objects and the Synergy structures defined in the Synergy repository. There are a number of data files storing data including exercise information, patient exercise lists, etc. And as you would expect, the whole system is driven by data. These data objects that we expose from Synergy are not just to be bindable to WPF forms, but they provide us the communication between a server and a client. On the server, we can not only expose data and logic, but the methods that we write in Synergy can be exposed as stored procedures. And these accept and return these data objects. Symphony Harmony allows us to perform SQL-style commands to manage data directly using commands like select, insert, update, delete. Harmony also provides access to your stored procedures, the Synergy methods, again using SQL-like syntax. It's very easy to access data you need or the logic to execute through Symphony Harmony using a single line of code. Symphony Bridge is the server that accepts the remote connections using Symphony Harmony. And that's what we put on the Azure platform. Bridge can be run as a console application for testing purposes or a Windows production environment. The code base for both of those is the same. Bridge provides access to your Synergy.net logic and SDBMS files, as I say, using SQL commands. Currently, Symphony Bridge provides for 3 connection protocols, all of which are hidden from the client and just allow different deployment models. The TCP/IP connection is intended for internal networks or LAN configurations, where security is not as important. The protocol is quick, simple, and ideal for testing, as you don't need any elevated privileges. Outside of the local LAN, on the WAN, for example, or the internet, you would use the web HTTP solution. Symphony Bridge acts as a standard web service in this model. For complete security of your on-prem data, there is the Service Bus Relay. And Service Bus Relay allows an outbound connection from your on-site premises data service to an Azure Service Bus Relay in the cloud, and your clients connect to that. It's really good, really funky. Okay. Coming to a server near you, ASP.NET Web API 2 protocol support. This allows your chosen client, i.e. JavaScript, in a web page to communicate directly with Symphony Bridge. There is no Symphony Harmony client for this server. You write the client completely in REST verb format. It accepts the same SQL-style syntax to access the same Synergy data objects and the same procedures. And it returns the same data objects, but in JSON format. The implementation within Symphony Bridge is also fully extendable with your own methods. If you find that the Symphony Harmony or Symphony Bridge doesn't give you something out of the box, you can then customize it yourself. The new protocol will be released in July 2017. You heard it here first. I'll be posting plenty of blogs, so make sure you signed up for the RSS feed. So we have our server, which exposes the data and logic, and now we need the app to function as well. The structure of the app is layered, and all layers up until the actual device layer are all shared or common code. The first or base layer is the client representation of the Symphony data objects. These are all code generated using CodeGen and can be extended to include custom properties, methods, or functionality. The client-based data objects not only provide the same properties exposing repository-defined fields, but also provide the required connection properties between the serialization between the server and the client using JSON or BSOM. The next layer is the communication layer. This Synergy portable class library simply provides access to the data and methods using Symphony Harmony syntax. Methods such as standard login or get patient exercise use the Symphony Harmony syntax to query the remote database or execute stored procedures, as you can see in that code snippet. The data sent to and returned from the Bridge server is in the form of these data objects. The next layer is the common or PCL portable class library, again written entirely in Synergy or Synergy.net. And this library really is the engine of the client device application. Thus far, I've not mentioned client technology yet, and to some extent I've not needed to. These libraries on the server and the communication PCL on the client all work with any type of technology. Physio My Way utilizes Xamarin Forms, which is quite cool. Xamarin Forms is very much like writing WPF forms. The structure is almost identical. It's just the syntax is, well, it's just slightly different. Our common library contains then some standard and familiar elements. The whole Xamarin Forms design is based upon the tried and tested model view model design pattern, or MVVM, as we've talked about for many years. The model element of our design would be the data, object and communication libraries. Our view model communicates the data from the server to the visual elements and back to the standard Symfony components, like generic commands that are bindable to buttons. And of course, data objects in our model expose bindable properties that will raise the required events to notify the user interface. Data objects also provide all the required conversions from synergy types to the native types on whatever platform you are on. These conversions are done on the server and not on the client. Thus, the client is only seeing native data types. The long and short of it is, if you've been using Symfony in your desktop developments, then you are well placed to be able to easily build Xamarin Forms apps for your devices. In this same common library, we can implement the view, or the user interface. Note here that this is still the common library. So the forms we create here will be compatible on all devices. We're not creating device-specific forms. And Physio My Way is designed to target currently Android and iOS. The language the forms are written in is XAML. XAML is almost the same as the same XAML you use in WPF. There's slight differences. For example, in WPF you'll see a stack panel, and in Xamarin you'll see stack layout. You still data bind to properties exposed through the view model, the data objects of your application, and the commands to execute the logic. It is possible to implement device-specific UI elements in the XAML, but Physio My Way uses totally XAML coding. And so we need to actually create the client-specific bootstraps that bring the whole and all these other libraries together. We have an Android client project and, of course, an iPhone or iOS project. These client projects not only target the actual device, but contain device-specific elements and resources. Android and iOS have different requirements for things like images, icons, splash screens. All those sort of resources have to be built into the actual device projects. For the Physio My Way app, we needed to be able to handle, for example, making the device vibrate or making the device speak to you. And that code is coded into the actual bootstrap for each device. The ability to interact with the device to make it vibrate, for example, is specific to the device, so the components need to be added into the device, and not the common project. However, telling the device when to vibrate is controlled by the common view model. It raises an event which the device-specific bootstrap code listens for and actions. When it gets the action, it calls the component to vibrate. Not all components work like this. The video playback capabilities that I showed earlier are all added into the view, or the common view, the common UI. So in a nutshell, that's the technology stack used by Physio My Way. The advances we've made, I say we here, big heads up to our dedicated development team back at Synergex, have enabled us Synergy developers to be able to take full advantage of these amazing technologies. So all this technology is in place. Synergy.net rocks, and Xamarin Forms makes developing once and deploying many a breeze. Of all the aspects in developing my Physio Way app, the deployment of it so people could actually get it and use it was the most challenging. As the client mentioned, the target devices were Android and iPhone. Nobody actually had a Windows phone, so as we said, we didn't try to target that platform. Saying that, we believe the same code would work if we tried it. However, some of the components on the Xamarin Form are device-specific. Having built and tested the app, we began the process of deployment. The target for Physio My Way app was to be able to offer the app on both the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. The first place to start is on the web, and the Xamarin Publishing and Application documentation. This resource was invaluable. Before you start to consider deploying your app, I would recommend that you review all aspects of releasing your app before you actually begin a single line of development. I mentioned earlier about package name and package identifiers. Choose these wisely, because once you have defined them, it's difficult to change them and it can be costly. Define what your app is going to look like. You will need a splash screen, you will need an icon, and all images will have to be in a number of different sizes and resolutions, etc. Most application market spaces will not allow you to publish your app without an icon. You must version your application, and this must change with each release you provide. And for many sites, you must provide meaningful release notes. You must disable debug when you publish your app. Apps built in debug have a security vulnerability and will be rejected by the stores. For an Android deployment, the Google Play Store, things are relatively simple. You will first need to become a publisher. Guess what? There is a cost involved. Currently it's only $25 registration fee, and it's a one-off cost. Once you have subscribed to the developer service, you have a few things to do. Firstly, you need to log into the Google Play console. Once in, you can begin the process of creating your application. The application creation through Google Play console guides you through the process. You'll need icons and screenshots or images of your application in action. These are used to present your app in the App Store. You need to describe your application and make it sound like it's something, well, something somebody would actually like to have and use. You'll have to say if your app is paid for or free. The Physio My Way app is free to use. Another section you'll also have to complete as part of the application process is to complete the ratings questionnaire. This will rate the suitability of your app for different audiences. Questions include if the app has violence or sexual content. You can also opt in for in-app products and purchases. Although Physio My Way currently does not, it is very conceivable that we could, if we made this a commercial application, that we could add advertisements for nutritional products, things like that. So revenue from advertising could also be considered, but you'd have to check the boxes. To build and deploy on Android, you need to create various security certificates, which you can register them within Visual Studio. After you have built the app, you can then manually upload the resulting APK file to your Google console. The nice thing is, once you've done this initial load, you can then manage deployments to the Google Play Store directly through Visual Studio. And it's literally a couple of clicks. It's a very simple workflow once it's all configured. Just remember to up the version information so you don't get rejected every time. The whole process to deploy to the Google Play Store is relatively painless, and usually you see your new versions available for installation within a couple of hours. And it's ready on your phone. And as I say, it's all done through Visual Studio. Although you need to answer a few questions about the app and the binaries you uploaded are checked, that's about it from an Android perspective. Apple, on the other hand, is a totally different ballgame. If you are seriously wanting to provide access to your app on an iPhone, you really have to go via the Apple App Store. There are alternatives. In-house or enterprise distribution allow you to bypass the App Store and deploy directly to a device. However, it's designed for internal use within an organization and not a method to deploy to customers. There's also the ad hoc distribution, but that is usually designed for testing and is limited to 100 devices. So again, most likely a non-starter. So it's the Apple App Store then, and let the fun begin. I can't stress here enough how much grief I encountered while trying to release Physio My Way onto the Apple Store. The process starts off very similar to Google Console, in as much as you create a new app, name it, upload various icons, screenshots, make it all look pretty. You also describe your application, what it does and why it does it. Just like Google, you say if people pay for the app, and any in-app purchases, any advertising. You also click a disclaimer to say there's no advertising in the app. Basically, the questions cover all aspects you could imagine about the app. And then you hit the submit button. At this point, it's like lighting the blue touch paper and standing well back. The fireworks will begin. Well, they will when somebody at Apple can be bothered to review your app. Unlike Google, who just take a look at what you've given them, review the binary for any naughty ones or zeros, and then publish away, the people at Apple actually want to review it. They want to be able to run the app. Go figure. And I thought if it compiles, it's ready for distribution. Maybe I need to take notes during this afternoon session. Because Physio My Way requires a login, and remember, running the app will also allocate a Synergy device license, I configured a demo account, details of which you then need to add to the application details when creating it in iTunes Connect Console, they call it. Luckily, they use device emulators and not physical devices, which means a Synergy device license was not allocated. We only allocate on a physical device. So, what could go wrong? On the 24th of February 2017, we were in waiting for review, expecting to be released by the weekend. Yes, we have those real funny dates where I live. where we actually put the day before the month, before the year. Go figure why we do crazy things like that. Surely our weekend rollout will be possible. Why not? The app ran, it worked, it looked okay, images and graphics had all been accepted. What could go wrong? On Monday the 27th of February, they started to review my app. Now, Physio My Way is not the most taxing of apps. As I've said, it's been designed to be simple to use, a single touch, and you're doing the exercises. Now, not a great deal of app to review, but heck, what do I know? By Tuesday, the 28th of February, the Apple review team had reviewed the app and sent me a nice little message. So excited was I to get logged into the iTunes Connect portal and review the "well done, great, your app has been released" message, just to get the sad realization that my app had failed the review process. But why? Did it fail not to run? Did it not work correctly? So what did go wrong? What did they not like? Well, it turns out nothing about the app itself. These are the questions being asked before they would accept the app. Turns out they could not understand that this was for a university study, even though the description clearly stated that it was. I checked the box that said it's a free app, so why reject it asking who's going to pay for what? Actually, reading between the lines, my take on this is that they suspected we would be getting payment some other way and not through the App Store, so they would not make money. And you know, I get it, but that's the charging model of the application. The physio will pay to use the app and provide it to the patient. In the UK, the National Health Service is always free at point of need for everyone, so we couldn't charge the patient. It's the problem with the restrictive deployment models that Apple provide, really. Obviously, we responded and reiterated this was a study, it was free to use in all aspects, nobody paid for anything, there was no advertising, nobody bought anything, nobody spent any money, they just ran it, and they ran it with one click. Well, hello, yes, this is the exact purpose of the app. It's to perform a study to determine if using an app would improve compliance by people who needed to exercise. Apple's still not happy and reject the app again. I'm not going to go through the further emails, but basically, in a nutshell, we didn't change the app at all. We didn't change any aspects of the financial elements of the app. But what did we change? We did change one thing. Was to provide a description that made it sound like money would be made from the app. Once this was provided, the Apple review team, things progressed. Eventually, we finally got app approval. It took 7 days to get the app approved for release. Remember, Google was 2 hours, Apple was 7 days. The slightly annoying thing for me was that it's nothing to do with the app or the technology I was using, i.e. Synergy.net. It was just the perception of who makes what money, when and how. But all good things come to those who wait. And at that point, we had the Physio My Way app released and downloadable from both the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. So, high fives all round. It took some effort to write the app, and to be honest, what I felt like more effort to actually just get the app published. Maybe the first Synergy app in the Play Store and App Store. If you've released apps written in Synergy to these public stores, I would love to hear your stories. Now, Physio My Way was from the ground up new development. There was a design goal and we implemented it in Synergy to meet the specific requirements. But it does not mean that you need to be making brand new software. Your existing systems can still take full advantage of these capabilities. Exposing your existing subroutines and functions is possible, practical and feasible using these technologies. If your data is defined in repository structures, then you're all set to code generate data objects. Creating methods to call into your procedural subroutines and functions, and calling these methods on remote servers using Symphony Harmony and Symphony Bridge is a technology available to you today. For a long, long time now, people have commented that you would not write a brand new development in Synergy. I don't believe that's true any longer. It's no longer the case, as Physio My Way proves. It's a brand new application written from the ground up. We have the tools and the technologies now to enable you to develop the next generation of apps and get them onto these app stores. Although it's not hands-on this year for pretty technical reasons, we're going to cover every aspect of developing a mobile app, from server coding, deploying to the cloud, and writing the common platform libraries and the client bootstrap projects to create a fully working mobile app. And it'll all be running on these little devices by the end of the day. So, please, join us.
We've got all the elements in place. Let's take a comparative look into the initial designs and the final product. We went through plenty of designs, and at this point things started to get a little bit more serious, and we knew that we'd need to upgrade the beverages just a touch. So a little bit more than Earl Grey. We went for Diet Pepsi, obviously, still on the clock at this point. Now I've chosen 3 screens to show you today as examples of what I requested compared to what I received. First up, the exercise screen. Left-hand side shows the initial design. The exercises don't match up with the ones used in the study, but you get the idea. The main difference here, the colour-coordinated exercises, the grid or list view options, and the home button. Now, heading over to the right-hand side, you can see what's been done. The different selections mean that we can get to where we need to be in one click, as we've discussed. Hit the image, you're taken straight to the exercise screen, and you're where you need to be to complete the exercises. Hit the show info, you head into the exercise descriptions and videos. This design suggestion came directly from the developer and made the entire process slicker and much more efficient, which is exactly what I was looking for. Now, the colour and grid or list options are planned as future developments that I will come on to later. They weren't included in the current version of the app simply because they were surplus to requirements of the study, and time was spent developing aspects elsewhere. Now, next up, we've got the activity screen. The initial plan was to include a bold animation to help the user. Now, I spent too much time procrastinating, thinking up designs that could be used at this point, ranging from an animated arm doing a bicep curl to a sliding scale or even a revometer. Now, after some discussions, we came to realise that if the user had the phone strapped to the wrist, visuals are pretty unnecessary. So we turned our focus more towards the audio prompts instead, and they were absent. The other main difference with this screen is the absence of the start or stop options. With the one-click start, we could set the exercise to begin automatically after a short countdown. This meant that the only need for interaction was to click the I'm done once the repetitions had been completed. Again, just a little bit slicker. So the pictures that are included on there, they act as a very general prompt towards the exercise movement in place of the animations we were thinking about putting in. So onto the description screen. To be honest, there's not really a lot of exciting things you can do with a chunk of text and a picture of me. A little rationale behind the current setup. On the right-hand side, videos take time. It's as simple as that. We thought it'd be best to give the user exactly what they wanted from the pictures, have a quick read of the text if you can't get it from the pictures, and very much failing that, you've got the video as a backup option as well. Either way, we're covering all options. So right about now, you should be seeing the structure of the study from a participant's perspective. It involved a short familiarisation session with the app to get used to navigating it and using it. We discussed what was required of them and ensured that all of their questions had been answered. Then they went away for 7 consecutive days of completing each of the exercises, followed by an evaluation session where the participants were asked about their experience of using the app. This included a record of the exercises they completed, as well as their perception of its accuracy, its ease of use, any difficulties that they faced, and any recommendations that they'd make for future versions. Now, everything was in place, the app was ready, the exercises were completed, and the study was over as quickly as that. The first thing that I required was a breakdown of the data that was in a format that was easy to use and could be translated into usable information. This data would go into formulating the results section of my written report. And now this information was received promptly. There's nothing more I can say. As I mentioned earlier, the study is awaiting validation, so the results do remain hypothetical. I can't stress that enough. But I did want to share a couple of aspects with you today. Close your ears if you don't believe that they're true. It would appear from the data that the app has been able to successfully monitor the exercises completed for each participant. That's the opening statement. So now, that's not to say that everyone completed the exercises every single day, but if they had, then it wouldn't necessarily be a true representation of the general population and what you could expect in the service. Of the 20 participants that we had, the overall opinion of the app's ease of use was positive. We actually achieved an average mark of 9 out of 10. Examples of feedback comments included a clear and uncluttered main screen, the ability to get straight into what they needed to do, and the option of revising the exercise movements with the help of the images and videos. Exactly as you'd expect, really. Now, the participants also felt that on average, the app was able to monitor the repetitions with 88.5% perceived accuracy. Now, from the data that we have, we can see that each person completed the exercises in line with their recollections. So that means if they've said that they haven't done it on a Saturday, because they're hungover, I assume, then we had no data showing for that day. I first thought that the reason that the app hadn't achieved 100% perceived accuracy must be because we must have missed a repetition or two. So we dug a little bit deeper into the exercise durations. So they all matched up between the time spent exercising compared against the expected duration based on the estimated time to complete each repetition and the evidence behind it that we talked about earlier. So I've drawn two conclusions: that more education is required regarding the correct exercise durations, and that participants are just very hard to please and you can't get a perfect 10. On to the difficulties first. So these were very minimal in the familiarisation session, in the study itself, and in the post-test questionnaires. Problems faced included the opening screen displaying validating on one of the days, which I'm reliably informed only occurred if the user wasn't running the latest version. Easily fixed. Tracking of exercises they completed that day, and the download space, which frankly there's not really a lot we can do about. In all, not bad for a first attempt. In terms of future developments for the app, we had spoken about different options continually throughout the process, as you do, and decided that due to time constraints, and with it being the initial testing in a feasibility study, that we'd keep the basic structure to the exercises and the educational parts. Building on this in the future, obviously, we would ideally look to add in several features, including but not limited to expansion of the exercise library to include more range of movement exercises at different joints, as well as bodyweight exercises, purely because they bring around their own difficulties in terms of measuring the lack of movement in a static hold such as a plank. Now that's one I'm not going to demonstrate. But an endpoint to the exercise was next, signalled by an audio and a visual prompt so that the patients were aware of exactly when they'd completed their set and their exercises. Colour-coded banding around the exercises, and a traffic light system to indicate which exercises remain outstanding for that day. Contact options to open a line of communication between the physio and the patient in instances where the patient has encountered issues with the exercise programme or, God forbid, with the app itself. Now, examples of which could include the onset of pain or discomfort, or the exercises just being too easy. Either way, it prompts for progression or regression of the exercise programme way before the normal opportunity of the next appointment in 3 weeks' time. In the interest of competition, we would also look to incorporate achievements into a future version alongside social media. So examples include number of continuous days of exercises, overall number of repetitions, overall number of sets completed. As I touched on earlier, you really can't underestimate the power of sharing this information with others and the impact that it can have on patient motivation. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, apps are impervious to ad blockers, unlike browsers. This opens up a world of opportunities to drive the financial side of the app, which we haven't really considered for part of the initial version, as Richard touched on, but it would make the project much more financially viable in the future. Now, to summarise, is the Physio My Way app a sustainable option in the NHS, given the current restraints on time, staffing and resources? And will it have a positive effect in the settings that I've highlighted? In short, I don't know. All I can say is that it's feasible, and I could hypothesise that it would based on the study results. As with every research project, you tend to just create more questions than you actually answer. Today, I'm aware of one similar study which is looking to implement the use of a similar app into an exercise prescription service, although results of that study also remain yet to be published. It does appear that they are getting similar positive results. And so the ball keeps rolling, and hopefully we've sparked the next little bit of research and the next development in healthcare. Now, it has to be said, I wasn't the only one learning throughout this project. I spent a considerable amount of time trying to teach the developer how to take screenshots on his phone. And how does he repay me? In the only way he knows how. He turns the video sideways and adds £40. Fantastic. But in all seriousness, without this project, I could have been looking at spending 9 months conducting a secondary research project and reviewing the prevalence of lower back pain in students or the impact of self-diagnosing using Google. All very viable projects, I'm sure, and entertaining in their own unique way. But it's safe to say I have thoroughly enjoyed this project and being able to overcome the challenges that it's thrown our way. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Richard, firstly for joining me up here today and helping me to deliver this presentation, but also for ensuring that the project has run smoothly from start to finish, for his guidance in improving each individual aspect, and for developing Physio My Way into an app that has far exceeded my initial hopes. Also, thank you to Bill Mooney and to Synergex for giving me the opportunity not only to develop this project in terms of investing time and effort and resources into its development, but as well as inviting me up here today to present to you on how I feel it's impacted my approach and how it could impact healthcare in the UK now and in the future.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Yeah,
thank you to
much.
Ashley.
Well done.
Thank you.
Good one, huh?